For those who don't know, I'm Mickey X. I'm one of the co-founders of PhotoFrome. The other co-founders are in the room, David Chedji, Gerardina Sanchez, and Martin Bax. We founded this little venture about 3 years ago, as some of you know, and so this is our third edition. Don't worry, I'm not going to speak for very long because these are the people you want to hear. My job is to tell you where the toilets are, which if you don't know are through that door. And also, by the way, that's where the bar is at the end of all of this. My job is also to tell you that if we need to leave, that's the exit. Okay. But I'd be remiss if I didn't tell some of you a little bit more about PhotoFrome and why we're doing this. PhotoFrome is a community interest company, and our job is to put photography on at all levels. That means students, it means professionals, it also means international photographers, local photographers, and so on. And we started as a dream, nobody believed us, and here we are, 3 years later, with what can only be described as a stellar cast of characters. A couple of data points. Part of my background is data. We are putting on the walls, or in the photo books, the work of almost 300 photographers, which is extraordinary. We didn't expect that. And for our various open calls, submissions, and so on, we had applications from over 60 countries. So this is actually a truly international activity, for which we're very proud. We also take issues very seriously. The theme this year is inequality. We think that's very timely. We think part of the job of PhotoFrome is to engage in a conversation about issues and put photography on the walls that will encourage that conversation, whether that's with school children, Gideon's work at the back, or some of the more serious issues, some of which you see in this room. So we're not afraid of conversation, and that's why tonight is called Conversation. As you look around, you can see some of the work that we have on display. Unfortunately, there are so many of you here, we've had to hide some of it in this room. But the idea of this exhibition was actually Joss, who is a member of our team and one of our speakers tonight. Deserves a big round of applause. So the core idea is to look at issues which are important, but look at them from the point of view of storytellers, people literally telling stories like Ken, and people reporting on the truth, people like Susan. And actually, Joss sits in the middle of that because his work around the edges of the hall is reporting on the making of the movies in a documentary fashion. So it actually sits in the middle of all of that, which is why we think it's a rather interesting way to display photography. Now, I said I wasn't going to speak for very long. I've already spoken for too long, but I think it all needed to be said. I will quickly introduce our speakers tonight. Ash is going to moderate the entire session. Good luck with that. In the world of film, I don't think I really need to introduce Ken, but for the rest of you, good luck with Ken. Joss has already had a round of applause, so. In the world of photography, if somebody had told me 3 years ago that PhotoFrome would be being able to introduce Susan Meiselas to this group, I would have been very surprised, but I'm extremely pleased that Susan's here, so thank you, Susan. The only other thing to say is that this is a conversation, and I know the speakers would be very happy for questions or even comments as they go along. All I would do is ask you to respect Ash as the moderator and identify yourselves when you want to make a comment, and Ash will deal with the proceedings. So did I miss anything, or did I cover the checklist?
I just don't very well. You use them in our room.
Okay. So let the conversation begin.
Thank you all for being here. It's great to see such an amazing turnout of people with these very distinguished folk that we have before us. I was looking around the exhibition yesterday, and one of the very striking things was, you look at these images and you think, well, what is real? What is the real image? What's the setup? What is fake? What is true? And we live in a world where it's very difficult for people to decipher reality and to understand what fake news is and what real news is. And images can be manipulated in so many different ways. And I wanted to start with Ken, actually, as somebody who makes films that look real, that look like fact, but they are in fact fictitious. They're fantasies in a way. But where do you sit in terms of? Do you feel that your films are factual or?
First of all, it's a real privilege to be sitting with Susan here, and with Joss too. We've been comrades, friends for 30 years, and the work has been one of the joys of working is working with Joss at our side. And the question you put, Ash, is very relevant. Are they facts? I think we were challenged on this right in the early days in the mid-60s, and one of the complaints from those who opposed the films was saying we don't know whether it's fact or fiction. When it said written by, and there's a cast list at the end, you thought that was a bit of a clue, but they still went for us. And I think what we would say is to turn the question around and say, what truth is there in the story? And I think what we've tried to do is to tell stories that come from the situations we all know, the society we live in, the stories we recognize, and tell them in such a way that are authentic, and so finding the right locations that are true, the real places, working with cameramen and camerawomen whose photography is equally authentic, so that it's, and we often think, well, the camera is like the eye of a witness, a person. So the camera is generally at eye level. It is as if you were standing in the corner of the room or nearby, and the lenses match the human eye. Sometimes you concentrate on looking at someone in particular, Ash, so no, don't see anyone else now. And then, or sometimes they're a bit wider, and you take in the whole room, or a fair slice of it.
So Ken, you're basically somebody who can manipulate. Really, you know what you're going to do before you do it. Whereas Susan goes into a war zone, you don't really have a lot of control. I mean, a lot of people talk about the discipline of your photos and the fact that they are both that you are a witness. But when you go into a war zone, how do you find that discipline in that chaos, and also how do you actually represent that what you see without knowing what's going to happen next, and also, not really knowing how you might change that situation by being a part of it,
or how that situation might change me, which is maybe more true than ever.
Yeah.
Wow, I've already have 5 different things to say in relation to what Kenny said, because as photographers, I don't know if you know this, but we think of ourselves as different lenses. I'm a 28. I'm not a 35. I'm not a 50. I'm not a 21 and a 24. So, and of course, which camera? Ash just asked me because this is color work, but I was shooting with 2 cameras, with a black and white and a color, from the 70s into the 80s and 90s. I mean, I just had this, which we, of course, is for anybody training today, is digital and desaturate and make it black and white if you want. but those choices were so specific. And I sometimes got the right camera with the right film, and sometimes I didn't, you know, because it's very intuitive response, which is kind of what you're asking, Ash. Where you place yourself, what might happen. I mean, I think photography of this kind of reportage is very intuitive, and you have to, it's anticipatory. No. But I was going to say, I almost said this to Ken right before when we were in the famous green room, that I hadn't seen Carla's song probably in 25 years. And I looked at it last night with a friend who picked me up hitchhiking in the north of Nicaragua, who's in London, whose home I'm staying in. And we looked at Carla's song, and the confusing part of it was that it felt like a documentary. It was kind of extraordinary for me because I know it's placed in 87, and I was there in 87. So the truth, when you ask about the truth, it might have been scripted and fictionalized in certain ways, but what's remarkable, and I guess that has to do with Barry, the cinematographer, is capturing what truly was true to the culture. Not exaggerated, not dramatized, except in the obvious situations of the fake Contra. I mean, I lived with the real Contra, but it felt like that. So I just wanted to share that because I know we're right on this edge of what's fiction and what's true, but it's quite remarkable to feel that now we're looking back at a fictional film to know, in a sense, what did it feel like then.
And perhaps we can bring Joss in here because there you are sitting in the middle of all this, literally in the middle. You are somebody who's at one level capturing Ken's telling of the truth, telling of his truth. But when you take pictures of Ken's film, do you think, well, the images have to reflect what Ken is telling the world, or do you have something to say yourself? How does that work?
I think there's an inherent potential conflict to there, because the role of a stills photographer is there to take pictures to sell the movie, sell the film. However, what we've developed is a sort of second way of the pictures have their own life, and as a consequence of that, sell the film. So they're not the standard set up sort of menu of pictures that the studio needs to sell or the distributor needs to sell the film. They're a version of the characters themselves, and I'm interested in the depiction of the constructed characters, whether the photography can actually hold the message of the film, and can hold the politics and the emotion and the story of the characters. And when they're successful, they do, so they can carry it forward.
Ken, you've worked with Joss a lot. I mean, Joss has done a lot of work on your films. What is it that you like about Joss's sketch?
One thing's occurred to me just while we were talking. The one thing I must, in a little parenthesis, say, I never talk about my films because they aren't. They belong to the team that's made it, including the actors and everyone, the producer and Rebecca O'Brien and the whole gang of us, but particularly the person who I must always consider as the writer, Paul Laverty, who's as a lawyer went to Nicaragua as a human rights lawyer to observe the atrocities committed by the Contra terrorists sponsored by the United States. And you will remember Reagan said that I am at Contra. Now, Paul was there and in personal danger and has been a fantastic writer. And all the films we've done since then, 1995 or 4 when we made it, have been Paul's. So, it's they're not my films, they're ours. Really important to say that. Sorry, and
What do you
like about Joss? Well, I think. Well, I won't say anything personal. Don't worry. Your secrets are safe. But I think it's there's a great deal to like about Joss. But why it worked, and I think it's why it worked with the cameramen that I've worked with, Chris Menges, Bay Aykroyd, and Robbie Ryan in the last film or two, and they have the same instinctive eye. They're much more well developed, and from whom I learned a great deal. But it corresponds to the instinct that I had, and they made it. They translated that way of seeing the world into the technique of photography, and I think that's what's true with Joss. And I think there's what's made us work together well is that we seek out our shared humanity in people, and and we're absorbed by the same things we see. And a key thing is that the people in the films that we've cast are the real thing as far as one can make it. I mean, there've been some brilliant people who are also actors, but they have a connection to the role. Maybe just they're from the same place, because you can't hide your dialect and you can't hide your class. I mean, two things you cannot act. I think. If you can't hide the class you're from because that's what you've learned from a baby onwards, and you cannot, and the language you speak must be as authentic as the buildings we see in the landscape we see in the pictures, because language it's our history. It's not just phonetics. It is the rhythm of our speech. It's our sense of humor. It is part of the bricks and mortar of the buildings and the place. So the language, the dialect, the accent is absolutely a core thing you cannot change.
So when you went to Nicaragua, it's very interesting, the idea of knowing the place, knowing the people, actually understanding the language. I mean, you went somewhere but which presumably you didn't know that well, or you didn't, had you been there before? You didn't really know, I think you said you didn't really know what to expect. Yeah. So how did you sort of interpret what you found? I mean, Ken was making a film, Carla's Song, about Nicaragua in the aftermath. I mean, after the revolution had finished. You were in the thick of it. And so how did you navigate that?
Well, there was a lot there already. I mean, the revolution was ongoing. I mean, they were struggling at the time that the film is taking place in '87, countering the Contra. That was active, trying to hold on to the values of, and there's that very powerful scene where it's very clearly identified how the Contra targeted the success of what had been built over the years before that, the schools and the clinics and the et cetera. So I think, that was a very vital period. That was the last push, against a very formidable enemy, obviously, a covert war initially and then much more explicitly. I was just thinking about how you explain what it means to go to a place you don't know and you don't speak the language and you begin not knowing what will evolve, right? Very different than having a script where you know where you're going narratively, the arch. And I loved the end of the film, and I'd kind of forgotten that he leaves and she stays, and it's so beautiful. It's such a beautiful moment that she sings a song that I couldn't hear. Carla's song as a title, I don't know which song you were thinking of, but she sings these songs that even now when I hear those songs, they bring back all the deep memory of what the revolution dreamed of. They still have that power, which I assume you know, but I think when I'm moving from one place to another, it's not, I've often said, maybe I'm hearing on a radio the urgent voice at that time in a car, Nobody's in the car with me telling me, let's go here. I'm responding, and I'm looking, and I'm seeing, and I'm following a lot. a lot.
Feel fear?
Oh, of course, but you know, with amongst so many others, it wasn't my fear. It was kind of, there was collective fear, you could say. You know, there's so many ways of talking about this, but I think, you know, I'm very interested in this difference between what Ken was just referring to, the sound, the voices, the stories. And one of the struggles for me as a photographer is that those frozen moments are as if there are no stories within the photograph or outside of the photograph, which led me back 10 years later to make Pictures from Revolution, where I wanted to hear how they felt about time moving on. And they were frozen in those frames, and yet their lives and their understandings of what happened in that 10 years. It's not quite 10 years when Ken's film being positioned in 87, I'm making the photographs 78, 79. But by 87, there are a lot of people exhausted by the Contra-War, turning against the Sandinistas, who vote against the Sandinistas, whether or not they anticipated. And I'm coming from the wonderful world of the USA, so you know where I'm living now in a world which people voted for somebody they're now discovering maybe was not in their best interests, operating pretty brutally, in fact. So that's a very important turning point in the history.
Creating, and both Ken and you and Joss, actually, are you aware of creating memories of, I mean, for people that you know, that people will watch your films and they will viscerally feel what it was that has created the now, you know, that you can only really understand the present through the lens of the past, and you are sort of encapsulating memory.
In a way, I mean, I think what Susan is, I mean, what occurs to me when as you're speaking is that you have the amazing talent and artistry to find, yes, frozen moments, but the balance of what you show and the just the energy of the people in it and the precision of the arrangement of the what is in the frame is just fantastic, and that's actually what makes it last. I mean, if anyone can go along and snap the pictures, but they're totally unmemorable. And they don't capture the spirit and the energy of the time, and the significance of the time. But I think yours do, and that's what's such a huge quality.
Well,
But Ken, you're sitting under a photograph, and I'm thinking as you're saying this that when I'm in the forest and there's another picture with 3 figures and they're all wearing these masks to protect their identity. So I had no idea who they were until I go back 10 years later and she demasks and tells me the story of what it meant that she was there then.
Yeah.
So, you know, unscripted, she's in pain.
Yes.
The world hasn't been, I mean, the world she fought for, the people she lost in the process, you know, is very resonant. I was thinking that something Joss told me, which surprised me, that you started shooting the dream sequence, which is the flashback, which is quite brilliant because how you got Carla to be in that state of mind, and then you carry her to Glasgow. Can you tell us about that? Because that's versus shooting starting in Glasgow and then you go to Managua.
Yeah. Well, I think the again, it's a point of how you work. Really, is that from a film point of view, and for the character's understanding of what's going to happen, is that you don't tell anybody what the storyline is. That everyone in the film knows exactly who they are and why they're there at any particular point, but you shoot the film in the order of the events they would experience. I mean, normally films are organised by accountants, and they say we've got to do all the Nicaragua stuff at the beginning and in one go. Well, no, because the experience of the ambush and all that that's in her memory. It's in her memory all the time she's in Glasgow. So of course you've got to shoot that first, and then begin because of what her memory is. What will she expect when she goes back. So that she has to have experienced that.
I hope the audience knows Carla.
Yeah.
Do you all know it? Because it's a film about a Glaswegian bus driver who falls in love with a Nicaraguan and then goes back with her to find her ex-lover, husband-lover, in Nicaragua. It's what she finds there is quite horrendous, and she relives her past in Nicaragua. So there's this incredible link, actually, even though actually Susan and Ken have never met before tonight. There is this extraordinary link with Nicaragua, and Carla's song is very much that link. And so that's why we're talking a lot about Carla's song at the moment.
Yeah. No, that's a good point, well made. I mean, we made so many mistakes in that film. Anyway, you always do.
Can I just ask, Joss, are you inspired by documentary photography? And do you try to capture something of that?
So my initial sort of purpose was to try and be a documentary photographer, and I couldn't find a way into that world, and then the film world accidentally fell my way, and then it became an option to try and work as a documentary photographer on a film. It was sheer fluke that I met Ken. And then that synergy becomes like an imperative. You have to be independent of the cinema camera and make your own version of it in order for the pictures to not just be a clip from the film. So there's an independence, but in a sort of an observation of how a film is made.
Do you have, I mean, Susan, do you have...
I told Joss that he didn't know, but I did stills on certain films, but I would choose the film I wanted to be on and try and, I already told Ken, why didn't he ask me to shoot photographs in '94? We didn't know each other. But actually, you're safe.
Me.
No, you didn't go to Nicaragua. No, I was in Kurdistan, so you're free. It's okay. But no, what I was going to say is that I wanted to be on films where there was a historical imperative to telling the story. So Mississippi Burning was important. Old Gringo was interesting. That was the first time I was asked. It was kind of strange. I don't know if you remember that film, because it's about the Mexican Revolution. And they said, well, you know, you covered a revolution. You should cover this film. Like, you know, I can speak Spanish. But what I loved about it was exactly what I think you were finding, these moments that, you know, might not be the final moment of the film. You don't know how the film will be cut, in fact. My only struggle, and I asked you about this, was that the cinematographer was constantly in the place I wanted to be. I was crawling under his legs and trying to figure out, how do I get that angle that you're going to get? That was the torture, because, you know, when you're free as I am moving, I can move anywhere. On a set, suddenly you can't go here and you can't go there.
But there is something interesting in that, because on a film set, you're the only person not working for production. You're working for the marketing team. So you're the only one that can not be there, and they carry on filming. So then how do you be there and get your work whilst not being there?
Yeah.
So that calls into like the street photographer or the kind of reportage. How do you be somewhere and not overtly influence?
True.
And be told to get out of the way all the time.
Or you know, I finally had to negotiate, this is the prep for the shot. Can I shoot in the prep? Yeah. I'm sure you know this, because
he doesn't rehearse anything.
Oh, yeah, so then you're really stuck, because, you know, working with those boom boxes where the camera would be silent, you know, but you're carrying this huge thing. It's bigger than a 4.5.
Head.
Yeah.
Can you just keep on getting in the way?
Well, no, it doesn't, because we've, again, it's the advantage of a long work collaboration is that you.
I think it's in a long lens.
Yeah. The long collaboration is that, you know, there's, the key thing is, sorry, this is talking about films rather than stills again, but it's don't get in the actor's eye, you know, never be in the eye line. And so, you know, it's just becomes understood. And if there's and I think it's always helpful when, or most of the times when the scene is in the can. I mean, you'll often have some time, you know, on your own with them, not with me, just saying, you know, how about we just try this, and then then you get to, because obviously, and you and you would say this, is that a still is different in that you have to capture it in one image, whereas in a film you have a wide shot, a close up, two shot, whatever. Yeah, yes. And so it's a different challenge. But I think, don't want to talk too much, but I think two things just strike me that, in a way, we're talking about the details of work, but I think that certainly I certainly recognise in Susan's work and Joss's too, and it's something I would aspire to, is that two things really. But one is stories that reflect our shared humanity, and what we all have in common, and just recognise, in a way, solidarity with the people in the film. And you do films with people you care about, and find them as authentically as possible. It's the first thing. And the second thing is, it's a quote by the great American singer Paul Robeson, black cinemas of the 1930s, 40s, I guess, with a wonderful bass baritone voice. But he was also very political, and he wrote, this is from memory, and I think he wrote or said, artists should be the gatekeepers of truth. They are the civilization's voice of conscience. And I think that in a way is, I'm sure we don't live up to it, but in a way that's our function. And I think that's, certainly I know what you tried to do, what you have done, and because I can see it in your work. And I know Joss does it too. And it's, it's the driving force, really, is as far as you can, tell the truth. And that's why we know from your pictures that when America claims to be the defender of peace and freedom and democracy, we know they're talking shite.
Okay. On that wonderful note, since the theme of the festival is inequality, we'd like to give everybody an equal chance, and our panelists here were very adamant that they should not be the authorities on any of these subjects that we're discussing. So please, as an audience, feel free to ask a question at this point. We'll then go back to the panel, but yes, could you just say who you are and then...
My name is Alison, and I'm just very interested in what we have to say tonight. I'm just interested to find out what you think about areas where photographers can no longer go, when you have conflicts, as you had in Gaza, where you have no access whatsoever, so that people's stories can't be told, and how you feel that reflects on us, reflects on humanity, that we can cut things out and stop people witnessing events.
Well, I have actually somewhat counter view. I feel incredibly connected to the people who are reporting their own lives from the places they are. And that's a big change from what was possible in the 70s. We didn't have iPhones to upload images spontaneously and consistently. I've been following for the last, a year and a half, numbers of just extraordinarily dedicated and eyes and critical exchanges. I know that, of course, I've been restricted from borders, and I know what it means to want to be somewhere. But at the same time, I'm just stunned by the kind of dedication that we're seeing in Gaza and the risk-taking and the numbers of journalists that have been killed doing the work that, yes, those of us from outside might have done, but maybe it's even more important that they're doing. The question is what's going to happen to stop the bloody war. And all of us are complicit in that. We're all watching from a distance, unable to stop what's happening. And we know what's happening. It's not like we didn't know. I don't know if Ken feels this, but in the 60s, 70s, we felt like if people knew, they would then do, right? That that's what motivated me. Why did I cross a border and try to document the Mozote massacre in El Salvador? I thought it would mean something about US policy at that time. Did it? It's taken 35 years, there's still no accountability for those crimes. So it's a complicated curve. It doesn't mean you stop documenting, but I don't want to become a skeptic either. You know, I don't want that to become that desensitized to the desire to be somewhere, to document as best I can, to capture in an evidential way. But I also think it's tremendously important in this world to honor those who are living the realities and documenting themselves. I mean, Anna's work, which you'll come back and see, you know, with Fast Forward, is all about people's lives rendering what they can with cameras. So I'm just saying that it's an important...
It's the idea that people from outside can't come in and then can't get it back. And that the restrictions are really quite strong and difficult.
Yeah, of course they are. And I mean, there are also places you can't enter, any number of places in the world that you can't enter or haven't been able to enter at certain moments. But the difference of, let's say, the Cambodian massacres, which we did not see self-documentation, that's a new phenomenon relatively, you know, because of many factors. You know, digital technology is relatively recent. It's 20 plus years, let's say. The education of that many more eyes. So I think we're very privileged to have that kind of exchange.
Any other questions from the gentleman over here? Can you say who you are?
Oh, you're Daniel Worrell. Very interested in your remark about culture and artists are the gatekeepers of truth. So how can we, maybe iconoclastically, empower the artist community to looking forward to actually create a cultural zeitgeist change?
Ken. I mean, in the end, it always comes down to politics, I think. Politics and fighting hard, challenging all the time. I think it's, you just got to use your voice and organize as well as you can, join others who have the same point of view, demand, use whatever organizations are. I mean, if you're working, being a trade union, most of them have got right-wing leaderships, but conformist. But you know, there'll be a left organization there. I think in the end, you know, there's an old American slogan from the Wobblies: agitate, educate, organize. And they're all valuable, but the most important is organize, because otherwise the militancy is like a steam that doesn't drive anything. You know, it goes into the air. And so in the end, it's organization, and we just have to organize and use the power we have, because we're seeing, I mean, in a struggle, some of us find hard to take, but the Birmingham bin man, my God, they got strength, and I hope they win. and organize. They always underestimate our strength, so organize.
Any other questions? Yes, gentleman here.
Hello, yeah. What advice would you give to a young person who's looking to go into photography? Frome is very much sort of an incubation town, and on a councillor, I work with the team at the town homes of people. So what advice would you give them in terms of taking them as a career and that, and also what honesty in them?
The career part was hard. The curiosity is the easier answer, in a sense. To feel, to be curious, to find out, to engage, to connect. You know, what might become passionate might start just... Curiosity is a very strong, you know, wanting to bridge out of the world you live into other worlds, through other people, through dialogues. I mean, I was recently, in the last few days, I was in Vienna, and there was a conversation somewhat like this, but more focused on some work I did in Kurdistan. And young people were afraid to talk about going out into the world. They, this outsider, insider, to be a stranger someplace, to not know where to begin, to just allow themselves to not know. I don't know if Ken feels that. For me, it all begins with what I don't know, not assuming I'm going to know, wanting to know more. And living with not knowing is complicated. I mean, obviously, when we were talking, Joss was saying, at least if you were going to be on a film, you knew you were going to be on a film for 6 months or something. I'm living a much more unpredictable life, like in 2 weeks, I don't know, 2 months, but it's still responsive, right? So being open to respond to what you're feeling and what you might find in a path that you can't predict.
In terms of young people in photography, Joss, do you think knowing how to use a camera, how a camera actually works is still important? But of course, we just...
Yeah, I think that's become more and more complicated because the immediacy of how you can photograph and send it out has intercepted that period of thinking about what are you doing. So the speed has actually replaced the kind of the thought often. Like editing on a computer rather than on the film. It's too quick and it intercepts any type of ideas percolating or maturing. There's also like an oversaturation of images. When there's such a proliferation of images, how do you pick out the good ones? So it's complicated with young kids through school, through college, through university education, because for them to establish a working process is more complicated because the speed and the immediacy has prevailed.
But what about the beauty of film, a camera film, actually having it as a physical thing that you have to then take home?
That's having a big resurgence.
Yeah. And do you use film still, Susan?
It's having a big resurgence. It's having a resurgence, but it's kind of like LPs, right? Yeah, I still have my LP collection, but is it efficient for me now to work with film under some circumstances? No. It's too costly in time or in economics of that. I mean, so last week, some of you, I hope, saw many people in over 1,200 protests in America last weekend. I went to DC thinking, well, I've been to March on 68 in DC. What is this in relation to that? I wasn't with Martin Luther King, but I wanted to have a feeling for what was happening. And I took my camera, I took my zoom lens, etc., and I took my iPhone, and I used my iPhone.
Yeah, right.
And it's not that I didn't have it, it wasn't with film, it was digital, but still the fluidity of working with an iPhone in a complex set of dynamics that are, dictated by the street and the people coming together. I didn't want to be in a fixed position. And
the iPhone gives like a sort of an anonymity as well.
Well, you can blend in.
Yeah.
For sure, you're blending in with everybody else with their iPhones, and then you see all of their photographs uploaded, and so go back to how do you edit?
How do you select?
We have to have ideas that go beyond just the frame that we make.
Yeah, which is what you take with you.
Yeah, or what you take with you or see or go back to, or, I'm very moved. I don't know if you saw many of these, but I'm very moved by the signs, the handwritten signs that people were carrying. Not the ones that were produced by the unions, frankly, but the ones that were really made on cardboard and what they said and what people wanted to proclaim. And I do worry, are we going to be in a moment in time where they'll be forbidden to be on the streets? I can envision that from what I've seen in Latin America, when it closes down, that public space is too scary for people.
Yeah.
We are seeing that. I mean, in the marches to support the Palestinians, they're all moved. I mean, they're being categorized as hate marches. I mean, everyone here will know it. When it is actually about a ceasefire.
Yeah, in the U.S. too.
It is. It is a determination to end that campaign, and not only that, when they do happen, the content of the speeches is not reported said on the BBC and most of the mainstream media. The story will be how many arrests were made.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how our democracy. They're quoted as a sign of our democracy, but democracy needs a way of carrying the news of that for everyone to hear. That's the point of it. Well, if the news refuses to do that because of its point of view they don't want to have expressed, then that's an impediment to democracy. And then trying to close them down is one step further.
Of course, Ken, there were films that you made that were censored that were not.
Yeah.
And did that inflame you, or did it curtail you? And what did you think? I'm not going to be able to get my films out if I.
No, it just clarified. It illustrated something that I kind of came to politics in the '60s with the New Left and neither Washington nor Moscow as a basic principle, and the role of the state, and the media are part of the state, and quote another elderly gentleman who's no longer reported much, Lenin. He said the state is the executive committee of the ruling class, and the BBC and the other channels did that. You know, they said we will not allow this point of view to be heard, and that was in the 80s, during Thatcher, when Thatcher was not totally established. In fact, she was trying to win the battle against organised labour, and they refused to show the films. It's a long story, I won't get into it, but I think I made about 7 or 8 documentaries, and about 6 of them were forbidden altogether.
And Susan, just going back to the ubiquity of images and the fact that, there are still images like Molotov Man that we all know so well that encapsulate not just that particular revolution, but it seems to encapsulate revolution for all time, the sort of the incredible energy of that picture. And that's perhaps something quite reassuring, that there are images that endure, that they become sort of classic images. So they don't lose their power, they don't lose their force, even though there's so many images around.
No, but they're vulnerable to being recontextualized and used for multiple purposes, long beyond what you can control.
What do you feel about that sort of merchandising of the...
Well, they actually, unlike Che, who has been really commercialized, the famous image by René Burri and Cura, both of them in different ways. Molotov Man hasn't suffered that consequence. It's more seeing it used by many different, and I've really learned from documenting that image as best I can as it transforms.
Do you hold copyright over the image? You do?
Yeah, but it's not about the copyright issue, really. It's about a certain kind of social contract. I don't know if you feel that in the work, because you're working somewhat in a different context. But I do feel I don't necessarily have a right to make an image. I feel I need to be present in an exchange that feels, of course, there's a power dynamic. I can't guarantee what will happen to that image. That's a problematic nature, contradictory. So how much can I share that image? How much do they benefit from that image? Those are all, and to who else's benefit? Those are all complex questions that don't get resolved. They get worked on in different ways.
Any more? Sorry, yes, this gentleman at the front on it.
Basha. I was interested in what you were saying about the access that we're getting to what's happening on the ground in Gaza, through people being there and sharing this stuff, which they can now do through digital photography, so on. But in a broader sense, there is, of course, that can be a double-edged sword. There's a real risk involved there, because a lot of work I've done, research I've done, says that people don't trust traditional media anymore. They only trust unmediated, as they regard it, photographs, reports from people like then in the ground, taking their phones outside, and they pay no regard to the possibility that they'd be manipulated and decontextualized and recontextualized. So I'm wondering if that, in that context, what you think about how people can tell authenticity in what they're seeing.
Yeah, especially on the cusp of AI.
Yes, please. So there you go.
I mean, we're all on the frontier of very complicated challenges, I would say. I don't know, I guess what I was referring to, I hope you understood the spirit of it. Of course, I have many colleagues who've worked in different parts of the West Bank, etc., super frustrated that they can't be present. And their authority as foreigners, you know, is a contradictory feeling too, you know, that they would be trusted, they would be more authentic than an insider, so to speak. But I have to say in this year and a half, you know, I've followed certain people and I feel close to them as they're total strangers in a very different way than I might have and maybe people felt that when they saw my picture in Time Magazine or the New York Times, but it's a very different triangulation. There's something extremely intimate with someone, their testimonial, I'm not following the wire photographer per se. I'm following somebody who's showing me their life. And yeah, I mean, I just don't doubt that it's true somehow. You know,
I would tell things are true, photography, much as everything else.
yeah.
As I think it's, if it makes sense of the world you understand and live in, I think it's for you to judge in the end. If that's an accurate analysis of the world you're in, if it makes sense, you know, because obviously, I guess that applies both to still photographs and film stories told in the cinema. Do I believe that? Is that the world I know? And that's in a way that's a judgment for you to make. How is there something that I'm not being told that would change that point of view? Is it in the end? I mean, all you can do is present the truth as you see it, and the contract with the audience is we won't leave anything out, you know. So you always try to give the best tune to the devil, really. You know, so that so you hear the strongest arguments opposed to what you're saying, or the position of the film. But in the end, it's a judgment you have to make.
Would you like to?
Yes, Sarah Murray. I'm a journalist and writer. I'm really interested in the evolving landscape as AI comes in, and we have this rather terrifying prospect of really not being able to tell what's a real photograph of this precision, what's not. I wonder, Ken, perhaps if that makes your work of work artists and filmmakers, and what you were just saying about creating something that is the truth, becomes even more important in this world where AI is giving us so much feedback.
Mm-hmm. Do you think film, because it encapsulates a narrative, it tells a story? Do you think, and stories are perhaps more difficult to, well, they're removed from the truth anyway. They're a fable, and therefore that you're telling in a way an untruth, but you're making it true, and therefore, you know, in a way, film is a sort of AI. I mean, maybe we shouldn't be too worried about AI because we all create fantasies and.
I mean, I think it's, I think. Well, in a way, I think it's the same point, but more hidden. But it's the same point as the one we just made, which is that it's you've just got to keep your own eyes open and observe as far as you can what is actually happening, and you know, to try to keep an independent judgment, and if. I mean, you can imagine AIs being used, obviously, clearly in the internet with fake clips and all the rest of it, and fake quotes, and and how you disentangle that, I don't know. I mean, it's way beyond my my age group to even imagine it. So I don't know. But in the end, and also, you know, talking with people you trust, and just trying to keep a tabs on the real world that you experience. I mean, I think the people who are most vulnerable are those who would attempt to lead a movement for change, and we saw the smears that were broadcast and endorsed by, you know, pretty well the whole mainstream media against the last leader of the Labour Party, and I mean, those who knew him or had worked with him knew it was false, but nevertheless, it was catastrophic. Well, it was a campaign that succeeded, and and I think that's it succeeded because it's. I mean, if that had also been infected with AI, then obviously that would have added a whole new layer of deception. So I think it's immensely complicated, really.
I'm just going to take a couple more questions and sort of wind it up. We've been going for about an hour, and I think we're all reaching a certain sort of age where we have to pace ourselves. So are there any more questions? Yes, lady here.
I'm Jimena Tsai. What you just say, apropos what you were talking about, there's a brilliant article today in the Independent by Disease about images that are being constructed over time and shifted in Shema, and it's worth having a look at.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the better it gets, the harder it's going to be. I mean, we may not be around, Ken. I mean, truly, I think it's the more I see what the potential is, I think it'll be very, very hard, especially for next generations who already aren't understanding where the source of things, you know. I mean, I felt this when Apple developed scissors scissors was their technology. I mean, it's probably 25 years ago. And then you knew it was the beginning, you know, the beginning of anyone can take anything and use for any purpose, etc. And that's been progressively happening. And so how many pixels they borrow or reappropriate or integrate, or it's progressive, and we're so dependent on it already, you know. I mean, how many times have you gone into your iPhone and had the text message not come out with the word that you tried to put in because the machine learning is thinking it knows better than you what you're trying to say? You know, it's all moving very, very fast.
I'm just going to take two more questions, one from Martin and one from Georgia. And there's Martin, you obviously...
So Martin Wade photographer. It's interesting that possibly Ken's fiction, which is a story, is possibly in the long run going to be less corruptible, even though it's fiction, than possibly your work alone.
Yeah, well, that's part of what struck me last night, was how true the fictionalized Nicaragua was.
So part of the whole concept of this exhibition was to try and unwrap the wrappers of fact talking to fiction back to fact, and who can contain some kind of longevity.
I mean, it's complicated. As I look at the photographs around, you know, I don't direct photographs. I might have missed them because I'm not in the right place. That's my challenge, right? To be in the right place at that feeling that that's the right moment. And I get it or I miss it, you know? So these are somewhat different processes that we're talking about. I struggle with how to recontextualize an image that's decontextualized from history, and that's why it's such an honor to think about Ken creating narratives around these moments that I did live in a different way. But they are vulnerable in that sense, you know. And I don't want them particularly to be mine. It's not about my copyright. It's about this social contract, you know. Somebody sent me today, this morning actually, from Ukraine, believe it or not, an image that looks closer to what Banksy did with the Molotov Man and my Molotov Man, so to speak, my Molotov Man.
Another mutation?
Another mutation for fashion being generated out of Ukraine, and just sort of saying this is where it goes. Now, I don't know what to make of that, you know. So it's not, it is about the integrity that you can bring to the work. I think somebody asked about authenticity. I think you know Ken because he's made the films he's made over time. I hope, even though I go different places and work in different ways with different kinds of communities, that people trust that I've moved my body there to be present in a certain way, and that's what I can offer. So, yeah. With asking questions all along, not, you know, not standing still either.
So can we just have a final, thank you. Can we have a final question from Georgia there?
Georgia, it's a question for the panel, but pushing about your work, Susie, and collaboration, and sees that the...
Sorry, yeah.
Sorry, it says the theme of the festival and is that inequality. I was curious about the collaboration between everyone's work on Canon, Susan, but also Ken was speaking earlier about working as a team, and Brett got to talk about this team and words being, so I just thought collaborating might be a nice way to be thinking about the discussions.
So collaboration and how we all work together as a team, and especially since we have to, in the work that you do, project a message of some sort. And if we're talking about inequality, how effectively do you think you carry that message of inequality and how would you like to be remembered, Ken? I mean, in many, you know, not yet, but...
Oh, God. Somebody put in a shift, I guess, would be best if they would say that. I don't know. I mean, I think it's... I mean, I can't speculate on that. I think what is... when you just go back to first principles, really, I mean, I've already said it. I mean, doing what you do is a single eye and capturing with immense talent and artistry an image in a sea of random things happening in front of you, one image that actually says what this is about. You know, and that's I mean, that's wonderful. Maybe we haven't spoken about that enough, because that's a wonderful ability that you have. You have, and I think that's, you know, something I'm in awe of. I mean, what we've tried to do in a related way is to find stories that, if you just tell the event simply, the characters, the conflict and contradictions between the characters capture the essence of that situation. And if we've done that, then that's just telling that story will connect to people and say, yes, that's how it is. You know, and that's the conflict that I recognize. And there's is this our last go? Yeah, can I, and there's
make a speech.
No, there's one other quote that comes to mind, which is some lines by Bertolt Brecht, and it's only in the English translation, but I think he wrote from memory. I always thought the simplest of words must suffice. If you say what things are like, it will break the hearts of everyone. But if you will go down without a fight, it's surely clear to you. So, last word is, you've got to have hope to have a fight, but my God, we need it.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Great. Well, no, please, Will.
I was just going to say that one of the wonderful things about film is the collaborative nature of the making. And I love that you said the film is not mine, it's ours. I would say that the photographs are not mine, they're theirs. I mean, you know, it's their history. They created it. I was lucky to be present.
Is it a lonely place to be? Photographer in the midst of
Of course, it's a very different. But the community is the collaboration. Is really the people that you meet and become part of the world you are welcomed into. Or that's a great.
Do they talk
approach.
about? So if we were talking about a concept like inequality, would you discuss that with the people that you're with and their situation? Do they have an understanding of what you can do for them? So.
Sometimes they know better what those pictures can do for them than I do.
Right. And
I mean, one of the first things that happened in the first anniversary in Nicaragua was they made a tourist poster of the photograph that was on the New York Times cover. They knew exactly what they were doing, way beyond what I would imagine. They wanted people to come and see the revolution.
Yes.
It wasn't, there was no exchange about it. So they just knew to do it, and that's okay.
And Joss, do your pictures have a life beyond Ken's films, do you think? Sorry, Ken.
Well, they get out, and they become like a sort of representation of a theme. So just this week, there was a big picture of I. Daniel Blake in The Guardian illustrating benefit cuts. And the picture of I. Daniel Blake, the poster, gets around the world onto pavements and onto T-shirts and onto, moments of, don't give up the fight. So they get out, but in an illustrative way of the themes which the films have highlighted.
Well, thank you very much, Ken, for your last words about hope, because I think one of the things that your films always carry, no matter how bleak they seem, is the tenderness between people and how we can get through things by being together. And your films are very much about that. And it's very nice to hear about you and your collaborations with the people that you're photographing in these really difficult situations and bringing out those stories.
I'd also like to say, in the sort of the whole cadence of our 30 years, that's sort of stitched in and out of us. And my career was sort of wobbled at a certain stage, and then that's where your mates come back in and stitch it back together again. So there's people here that sort of know us, and old friends and new friends. And that's absolutely critical in the sort of loyalty and how that then improves the work.
And that's something that AI will find very hard to capture, fortunately. So, there'll be a chance to all mingle and be together very soon. Susan and Ken are going to be signing books. Please just stick to the books that are there, and if you've brought heaps of books with you, maybe another time. And also, it isn't a careers advice process, so
no unsolicited material.
No unsolicited material. Yes, thank you very much indeed. It does happen. And Mick, yes, would you like to?
I don't know, would I? Yeah, I just want to say a real serious thank you to everybody. And in this world of sound bites, you always try to capture the essence of things. I'm not really going to do that.
Do you feel the hand of history on your shoulder?
No. But what struck me very much was, which I expected but could see completely, was this pursuit of truth. And that's in all of this. What is the real truth? And you can see that whether it's the film or the documentation or the story of the film documenting. It's all about the pursuit of truth. And I think that is something that's very important to us today. And I think it really does bring alive this idea of inequality and why that was a good theme for this festival and why you're the perfect people to be talking about this as you are. The last point I'd like to make is that I am mostly really struck by your humanity. And I think that shows in the work, but it also shows in the way that you conducted the conversation. So it's been a great privilege. Thank you very much. So just one correction on Ken isn't signing any books, I don't think. But Susan does have a new edition of the Nicaragua book. What are you trying to tell me, Susan?
Joss is going to sign too.
Oh, he's going to sign too. Oh, there we go. Okay,
T-shirts.
so the price was £45, but with 2 signatures, it's now 55. But anyway, there is a book signing. The bar is open. We can't show all the work, but you've got a lot of the work that you can still see, and we would hope that people would mingle, enjoy, have a conversation, enjoy the work, and enjoy the ambience. So thank you for being a great audience.
Yeah.